So we've got some kind of in-person folks and some online folks. So it's maybe a little bit of back and forth because I'm just going to go in the order that we have presented or like we've listed here, which with everyone speaking is 6 people in less than an hour and a half. So 10 minutes. Please keep your orders to 10 minutes. And we're gonna, yeah, hopefully 10 minutes. So that'll allow for some time for discussion. You want us to be able to not just fill the entire time with the presentation. So I appreciate your help with that and the kind of time here, and I will start kind of creeping towards our speakers. So first up we have Julian, who is online, and am I to understand everyone online is good to go with sharing their screens and they're all beautiful? Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Julian, you have 10 minutes.
Oh, that was quick. 1 second, please. Okay, thank you everybody for being there. I'm Julián IDROBO and I will be presenting you an overview of a project that we're conducting with the Arctic Research Foundation and the University of Manitoba. My name is Julián IDROBO and I'm a research chair for Aurora College. And the context of this project is that the Arctic Research Foundation, which is an organization that is supporting production of knowledge and co-production in the North, launched a 20-year research project aimed at supporting indigenous fisheries and ensuring that they would participate in the development of sustainable fisheries in the Great Slave Lake. As part of that project, they contacted the University of Manitoba and Aurora College to receive support, and we did that through hiring Paul, who was actually the Spanish presenting to lead this process. And so the Great Slave Lake fishery, it's located in the southern portion of the Northwest Territories. It's a very diverse socio-cultural place. It has 8 communities, most of them indigenous, Dene and Cree. And it has historically provided them with sustenance, and it has a commercial fishery that started in the mid-1940s. The main species that you can get there are whitefish, walleye, inkonu, and lake trout. But in 2017, the government of the Northwest Territories launched a strategy for revitalizing the lake commercial fishery. But this process is very economically and export driven. They want to sell fish from the lake outside of the territory, and there is no mention or inclusion of indigenous fisheries. The rationale for this is that even though the production of the lake, the quota of the lake hasn't changed, the delivery of the production of the lake has been declining over time, and this is because the Great Slave Lake is remote, isolated, and that means that it's very hard to market the fish that gets here. It's very expensive to go out and fish it, and obviously as we have seen along the conference, the recruitment is very low. The fishing population is declining. So with this idea, they wanted to transfer the commercial management to a fisher-owned cooperative called Tucho, which is located in Hay River, and enable the processing of fish for local use and export markets. Before that, as you see in the slide, in the 1970s, the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation took over it, and they were basically receiving fish from the lake to process it there. And what happens with this project is that they want to increase the economic value of the fishery by increasing production, increasing access to southern markets, increase processing in the Northwest Territories, and a portion of increasing the market within the territory. And in the long term, the government wants to get to a kind of marine stewardship certification. They're still not clear about it. However, the reality of this proposal is that it relies heavily on only, even though there are 8 communities, relies heavily only on a single one in Hay River, and only in a single processing plant, which brings the question of what's a sustainable fishery for the territory, what it looks like, and for whom. So in that context, we started undertaking the project. Last year, we started compiling secondary data to understand the current governance framework, understand the benefits and historical trends of the fishery, and understand the context, the diverse context of the fishery, not just economic, but also its ecological, political, social, and cultural dimensions. Based on that, we're starting to do a consultation process that actually will start as we're speaking, that try to create some guiding coordinates for engaging the community. We're starting with early dialogue, and we're going to start asking the communities how they want to participate and how they want to refine the objectives for the project. We want to include their perspectives in terms of the governance, benefits, and historical trends. And we want also to develop a platform in which the data that we gather will be interpreted according to the community experience. And this will ensure that the community perspective of the GSL fishery will be included in the data gathering phase of the project. The second phase is basically engaging with communities and start thinking about and talking about what a sustainable fishery looks like in the future and how they can be engaged. We are, as you see, we're about to start that process. So we have been sorting out the context and how we develop this. This is some preliminary results of in which we try to portray the diverse values that are found in the Great Lake fishery. This is a social media trolling that one of my students did, in which he basically looked into in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all social media, what kind of values are being reflected of the fishery. And in fact, he found that even though commercial tend to prevail in the southern portion of the lake, in the northern portion, cultural values are much more are portrayed more frequently, as well as recreational. That begs question that the complexity that suggests that the complexity of the fishery around the territory goes beyond the commercial profile that the territory wants to give it. And if we want to talk, if we're talking about a sustainable fishery, those views and relations should be taken into consideration. The relevance of this project is that we are bringing communities and diverse values to the table. We're not just we're countering the revitalization process from the territory by showing that the fish is more than just money. This will guide the Arctic Research Foundation and the government on how to best support inland fisheries. And we're including and supporting a plural inclusive dialogue about the future of fishery in the GSL, the Great Slave Lake fishery, and also the Great Slave Lake, and also identify how you can develop, how you can support economic development, but also focus it from the perspective of intergenerational continuity, traditional livelihoods, and well-being. This is all that we have to present for now. We hope that next year, after Sol gathers the data, that will be socializing more results. Más dicho, thank you. Gracias. I think that was very good.
I take it that William cannot see us right now. Is that true? There's no camera for him. Okay, so I'm going to help field questions for you. We definitely have lots of time. Thanks for keeping that. So that was under 10 minutes. Are there any questions for William? Rachel?
Hi, thanks for your talk. I was just wondering how you distinguish between different types of values. You have like recreational and commercial and cultural, and how did you distinguish between that?
We are employing thank you for the question, it's a very good one. We are employing the social values perspective from the well-being framework as a starting point, but also allowing the emergence of those values to come to be discussed with our partners in the field as we are developing the work. For example, commercial, we're considering when there is monetary transactions involved, whether it's for local trade, as well as for export to US markets.
Okay. Thanks. Other questions? I have a quick question, which is around MSC certification. So when Hannah was giving her remarks yesterday, she was talking about a couple of Great Lakes fisheries. But we do generally think about the Marine Stewardship Council in terms of marine fisheries. So I'm just curious about that process, or kind of how that has gone, or if there's, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the process of certification for freshwater fisheries through the Marine Stewardship Council.
It's basically a proposal from the government. The process that we're trying to follow, it's sort of going a little bit against it, because it really doesn't include a lot of the diversity of what's going on in the territory. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you a lot more about it. It's just, I mean, right now it's just an idea from the government, and they want to get there, but it's really not clear how they will get there.
Thanks. Hey, Momo, can I, this is Momo Koken in the back of the room. I'm just curious, because you do a lot with certification too, and just wondering about freshwater fisheries outside of Canada. Does your organization do any work with freshwater fisheries and certification?
I have no experience, but we have been talking about it recently about how to incorporate them. So absolutely, I think this is a really important topic to start bringing them in. But I think the dynamics are also quite different. So, what we've been speaking about is the need for consultation to try and basically figure out, like, how do you incorporate this into certification? What is different? Like, what are the issues? If you have a bunch of performance indicators like you would have in the MSC, are they going to be relevant, or are you going to be getting completely different perspectives and situations? So the answer is no, not yet, but working on it.
On the radar, yeah. Momo will be speaking a bit more about certifications for the small scale sector tomorrow. So if there's anyone else in the room that happens to be a certification nerd, that would be a good chat to listen to. Are there any other questions for Julian? Okay, great. A round of applause, please. First time sharing a hybrid, I don't love it. I just say I don't love it. Because anyway. So I'm going to call on Hannah next to give some remarks.
Yep. Hello, my name is Hannah Harrison. I'm an economic assistant professor at the University of Guelph. Nope. I recently finished a postdoc at the University of Guelph. I was going to give a talk today about Great Lakes fisheries, commercial fisheries governance, and my proposed idea for a blue belt, in similar veins with the green belt, which some of you might be familiar with. However, in light of the events of earlier today, the lands and waters on which this research has taken place are the traditional and unceded lands of the Chippewa, Manawash, and of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. I firmly believe that there should be nothing about them without them. And if they are not comfortable being here, then I will put the talk. So, third speaker.
Hannah did remark, just, in terms of one-on-one conversations.
Right, yeah. If you do want to hear more about it, I'm very happy to have one-on-one conversations, but I'm going to do a drawing talk today. And thank you to the chair for allowing that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hannah. Next we have Iria, which I believe you're online, right? Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Iria.
Hi. Hi, my name is Iria GARCÍA LORENZO, and I'm right now at the University of British Columbia, but I'm from Spain, from the University of Vigo, and I have like one special grant, so I'm from both universities at this moment. I have been following like the previous session, so I know that something just had happened related to the Indigenous communities representation here. So I want to maybe, like, my presentation is related to this, just to make sure that I'm here. I like this research. It's like one case study among a huge research that I'm doing about the fisheries organizations. So my perspective it's like from an European person that is like learning, beginning to learning. I have been here on like for 6 months.
Iria,
Yeah.
For 1 second, are you using a headset?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a little bit, I don't know, the sound's not coming through. How are you finding it back there? Are you hearing okay? Yeah, we're having a little trouble hearing you. And I also can't see you. Can you just, I don't know, maybe just play with your headset a little bit, or I don't know if you have a microphone or it's like AirPods, but we're just, the voice is coming through the audio a little bit choppy.
And right now, it's better like this.
It sounds pretty echoey and a bit like choppy.
I don't know. I'm using like the headphones I used to use. And you cannot see me?
No, we cannot see you. Okay. Do you mind putting it a little bit higher so it's between your nose and mouth? Your microphone? A little bit higher?
Like this? Maybe.
Yeah. Can you try that for me?
It's better?
I don't know. Make a sentence.
Yeah. Hi, that I'm Iria GARCÍA LORENZO, and I'm from Spain, but I'm right now at the University of British Columbia.
I think it's.
I don't know.
Okay. So say again.
If you have volume on your headset, it might be that the volume on yours is up too high because we're kind of getting like a feedback. I've had that problem.
I will try to check.
And I think it'll be better if we can see you as well, then we can, it's oftentimes easier to understand with the face as well. But yeah, it just sounds almost like you're in a wind tunnel-ish, a little bit like feedbacky and echoey and windy.
I don't know. I have checked it, but I don't know. And I have like a camera.
Yeah, we're good. We can see you now, which is great. Yeah.
You can see me now?
Yeah.
Because for me, I don't know when you can see me or not.
Yeah, we
Because
can
it's like.
Yeah. No, we can see. And if you go back to presentation mode, then we'll be back in seeing your PowerPoint presentation in full presentation mode. Let's do that.
Right now?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Well, we're gonna just give it a go, and maybe hopefully enough will come through. I'm sorry about this.
Yeah, no problem. I will just explain like maybe I don't know. It's not my week. I will say you that I was hit by a softball ball. Then I got a concussion, and then they canceled my flight to go there. That I was supposed to do it in person. So something more has to happen. So maybe it doesn't work at any point, and I'm sorry, but this week is not the week, and maybe. I just must say. I was saying, I tried to do it like slow because I speak really fast, and maybe I just go into the discussion that was most important. That I'm here because I'm from Spain, and I'm here right now at the University of British Columbia, and I'm doing like a huge research about small-scale fisheries organizations or community-based fisheries organizations. And here I wanted to study like indigenous communities, organizations of indigenous peoples in Canada, how they are organized. So I have realized that something happened in the previous sessions. So I want you to know, like this is like my perspective. So what I'm learning about the Indigenous Communities Organization right now, and the idea of this presentation, just to person there, was to how can I adapt my research, my study to the case study of Canada, as I'm realizing that the Indigenous communities are something totally different. Since right now, I'm at the Vancouver, I cannot be there. So I acknowledge that the UBC campus is situated in the traditional, ancestral, and unseen territory of the Musqueam people. I'm going to do first a little introduction, what I do, and then I'm going just to directly present, maybe just to have some ideas of how can I adapt this research to Canada. So what I focus is in small-scale fisheries because of the benefits of the sustainable development that we already know, but mainly what I call the community-based fisheries organizations. So what I really want to know is, for example, like in the previous case, like the cooperative they were talking about. So how that cooperative is organized and how what a group of persons can be can have benefits, different kinds of benefits around one resource when they organize like collectively, and they are like they have like this relation on a cooperative way. Yeah, and then I just to study how this could benefit the what I use.
Iria, I'm sorry, I'm really struggling. I imagine my hearing is not great, but I'm struggling. I feel a lot of people are really struggling. I'm gonna try one more thing. Can you take off the headset?
I could try, but I think I can do other things. I can do it from the mobile without presentation. So
From what? Sorry?
I can do it from the mobile without like the PowerPoint.
Okay. Is there?
Can I try? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
However, turn off her video, that sometimes makes the audio clear.
You think it's what?
I think it's actual microphone.
Yeah. Yeah, if you, okay, so everybody is, we're person for this. But if you mute yourself but call in on the telephone, maybe that would be better.
now I'm trying to check how to go. That's not amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, like self, like, anyway, critical thing. So I hope my students are here and they know that like after 2 years of having our lab meetings in the same office, I still can never connect my computer to the screen in the exact same room for 2 years. So this is like, I have other strengths. Tech is not one of them. Okay. So she's gonna join, you're gonna see her pop up, I assume, as a
She's there.
participant.
Here, but now you can hear me better. But
That's better, yeah, that's better. Okay, take it away. Thanks.
now I have to check where I am. Now I cannot. And now the Zoom just disappeared. But okay. This wasn't
You
easy.
should make your presentation, yeah, exactly, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to get like all the minutes of this presentation. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, I just applied the socio-ecological framework that most of you just already know, just to study the resource system, the governance system, the resource units, and the actors. And then the most important and maybe different thing that I do is like to apply the cooperative principles. That I apply a methodology from the social economy. The cooperative principles, if you know, these are the voluntary and open membership, the members' economic participation, democratic member control, autonomy and independency, and then education, cooperation and cooperative, and concern for the community. So what I have done previously, it's like in different countries, like in Spain, in Portugal, and in other countries of Southeast Asia, just to analyze these different things of the past dependence, the resource system, the governance, and the fulfillment of the cooperative principles. It's like I have one paper about it, so it's all there in the paper, but it's, as you see, it's like from each of the country, I have been like analyzing these ideas. So these are like the socio-ecological frameworks, and then all the cooperative principles one by one, how the associations or the communities that are there, they are there, if they fulfill or not fulfill that principle. So in here, the main thing is if I can here apply like the social economy to the indigenous communities, because if we realize about what the social economy is, something that maybe arise to confront a traditional capitalistic market economy in the 18th century, but the indigenous communities are much more previous of all of these. So for example, the concern for the community, how I'm going to apply, how I'm going to understand. So I realized that I was learning a lot just trying to confront these things. So I decided to apply like the two I'd seen, but in the social context. I have seen that it's very used here with the traditional knowledge, but maybe it's with the ecological traditional knowledge, but not so focused on the social rules that they have and what we can learn for those social rules. My idea is just to have as many fisheries organizations to have like some relevant conclusions at the end. So what I have seen here is like, for sure, they are really diverse. So if I'm going to focus in one or in different, it would be really interesting just to focus in different. For example, the ones that are presented here, like the Mohawk, the Haida Nation, Cree, or the unit of Nunatsi, they really different organized. Some are democratic, some are not democratic. There's the elitarian chiefs in many of them. Most they have more self-organization. And then for the different organizations they have producers, cooperative, contractors organization, enterprise. So the main idea that and it's final slice, and I hopefully you have here something. And the main idea that I want to maybe reflect about this is that when I apply the cooperative principles, I have seen, for example, this one. For the cooperative principles, we have to see like the democracy is one of the main things. But here we have like elitarian chiefs. So what I'm going to do with it, what does it mean if something is organized with something that's elitarian, that maybe for us is not that intuitive, that it has to be not democratic, like the best way. But maybe in the small scale, things are quite different. And what if we accept to have something that's hereditary from the bylaws when they are written or oral, that at first I thought that were more informal organized, but they are not informal organized, they are more oral organized. The time perception that they have, it's also like very different. So how are you going to apply of this? And the participation in the community, for me, is very important to know who is participating in this organization, to know who is going to have the benefits. But if we analyze it as a professional organization, where it's separated the work with the life, and the work with the fisheries, that it could be in Spain, but here is beyond that. You cannot separate it. So how can you analyze if it's fulfilling this voluntary open membership, because it's not voluntary and open membership, because it's like all of them just to be, you have this linkage between the rights of fisher. So that's where my ideas and the things that I wanted to discuss there with you. I don't know if you have something just that you can help me in this idea, or if you think somehow interesting, but here is like my emails if you just want to keep in touch with me, maybe in a better week. Thank you.
Thanks for your
Yeah. I must say that I don't hear you neither very well. So yeah, so just for the questions, see if there's someone or some recommendation, just slowly.
Thank you for being here in a week that was not your week. So
yeah.
Really appreciate that, and for your patience with the audio, and also to everyone in the room for your patience with the audio. Are there questions for Iria? Oh, Julián has raised a hand.
Yes.
Julián, sure, thank you.
Iria, I have a couple of questions for you. And the first one is, you talk about the 2IC approach, which is originated from the Mi'kmaq. Do they use the approach in BC? And the other one is, you're also showing us a very generalized landscape of indigenous perspectives. Is there a difference in terms of indigenous governance across Canada? Like, do institutions change? There is something that you can speak to about how diverse they are within?
Yeah. Here in BC, we have like Andrea Wright, that she is applying like the 2I perspectives. There is more focus like in, as I told you, like more in ecological knowledge, or maybe in something like related with their own fisheries. But yeah, something that has been here, like they begin to apply. And because of that, I was beginning to apply of that. And my problem when I came here is like, for sure, I mean, they're totally different. If you go here to the Haitian nation, they have their own constitution. So you will have all the laws just to study how they are organized there. And they still have a very powerful Haitian chiefs. If you go to the Mohawk, they had also like democratic systems previous. They had somehow of democratic systems. So it will be like totally different to how organized. So my idea, it's maybe just to try to have a double research, one in deep in one of the communities, to have all this perspective, to have to be able to go in deep of this on this perspective. But then I also would like somehow to represent this diversity and to learn of how this diversity could, I don't know how to say this. For example, before coming here, I didn't know much more of this diversity that there was here. And I think we can just learn to see by seeing, like like this diversity they have, that someone they are more democratic, other they are more like with the hereditarian chiefs. If the fishers, they are organized in some organization of they still like, I'm seeing like they have like families, fishers, that they are the ones who has the knowledge, and this is from here, from the lakes. I don't remember the name. But yeah, right now I'm more maybe in a previous stage of the research, as you have just seen. But I think I will focus in both things because of sure, I think it's very interesting just to go in deep in one community, but I would also like to have like a framework, a general framework, but I don't know how to do it because of course you cannot analyze all the difference. So I would like to have maybe like 5 or 6 that are totally different, that are from different parts, that have different treaties, because they are also very relevant with the treaties. And they, bit in the north that they have much more self-determination. So what's the difference when they have much more self-determination, and when they were like more democratic before? They have to be democratic because right now they have like the democratic chiefs mandatory because of the Canadian laws. So maybe the difference, if this it was easier in one, more difficult in others, on all this comparison, I think will be very interesting for sure. I don't know if I answer.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, thanks so much for that exchange. I mean, one thing that, just as a comment, in academia, I think we do this disservice, like we force students and researchers to like generalize or all like that we're always kind of building up to something, to abstract but yeah, just to say like that you don't have to always do that, right? So that care needs to be taken in that way as well, that the things are different. It's okay if they're different. It's okay if something doesn't generalize up or scale up or whatever, that's okay too. So, as you're like in the middle of this, just, don't feel forced to generalize. Like that would be one kind of just suggestion. Do what kind of feels right in terms of your relationship with the communities and the work that you're doing. Are there any other questions for Iria?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I will be here for 2 years, so let's hope I will focus more and I will have better luck.
We have another question from the audience here, from Paul.
So, what would you say is the difference between governance, fisheries governance, and fisheries management?
I didn't understand that one. What could I say about?
Well, what's the difference between, like, is fisheries management, co-management with First Nations? Is there a difference between that and co-governance, like from what you're researching?
Okay, I understand the thing of the fisheries management or co-management with First Nations, and maybe you repeat it. Yeah,
That question was around the difference between, say, co-management and co-governance, and how you're seeing that difference with respect to the communities and peoples you're working with.
I must say, and for sure, I mean, I'm from another country and all those things is totally different. But what I'm thinking that is here is like there are two nations, not two, several, but let's say like the indigenous area is only one nation, like 2 nations within one territory. So this of the co-governance and co-management, it's maybe be even not enough. I would say that what I'm thinking at this moment is that maybe they will have like different ways of governance in the different territories, completely different, and they will be just entrusted with all the rights, and they will do it like that way. Like you have different ways of governance with different countries, because in fact, territories, I don't know, it was the first time when I was here that I was thinking about this, but can be 2 nations being on the same territory without many, probably maybe totally different approaches, totally different laws. So for sure, I mean, it's not that I know there's going to be like this, but yeah, I don't know if co-management or co-governance, it's enough for these cases. And with this, I also like began to think in my own case of Spain, because we also have traditional knowledge, of course. Maybe it's not like the same, it's not like as useful as highlighted that it could be here. That is obviously totally. But what is about the traditional knowledge when it has been just long time under another kind of governance? Maybe like small scale has to be more, not co-governance, but totally self-governance in somehow. But yeah, I don't know. That's first ideas that I had at this moment about this.
What's your name, sorry? Chelsea? Yeah, I was just wondering if you could put your last slide up with your contact information again. I just wanted to jot down your email to follow up. Did you catch that area? Can you?
No, I didn't catch up. If you repeat it, I think it's better. I understand you better than the rest of the room. Sorry.
Can you put your last slide up so the audience will have the contact information again? Thanks.
Yeah, now let me think where I have this. First, I have to compartir pantalla. Compartir pantalla.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's not this one, but I will.
Yeah, perfect.
I can copy in the chat maybe if easier, so the other one can just keep going. Yeah.
Taking photos and taking it down.
Okay. Do you want to see my face again? In my and what? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Bhabishya KHANIYA. So I'm a master's student at University of Waterloo, and this is today I'm presenting my master's research project. So this is being supervised by Dr. Pradeep Naik and Dr. Abhita Pandit. So Dr. is right there with me. So this is a part of the Vulnerability Viability Global Partnership Project. So the title of my talk today is Understanding the Impact of Global Changes and Coastal Fisheries, Lessons to Progress from Vulnerability to Viability. So let me begin by saying that small-scale fisheries is an example of socio-ecological systems. So we all know the socio-ecological systems are facing complex challenges related to global change. Global change is mainly characterized by the climate change, or overfishing and pollution and all these kind of things. So because of all these stresses, there are kind of vulnerabilities within the socio-ecological systems, and there are kind of governance challenges due to these vulnerabilities. And there are also kinds of different kinds of responses that we are following to deal with those vulnerabilities. So some of these responses are social responses, and some of them are kind of governing responses, and so on. So again, to categorize them, some of them are kind of coping, and some of them are kind of adapting. So we have all these responses. So in a socio-ecological system, if we see, we do have vulnerabilities, we do have responses, we do have governance challenges, and so on. So it is kind of complex system. So how do we actually deal with that complex system? So now we do have a kind of complex system, and it is complex and interrelated with each other, right? So in that case, we need decision support tools. And as Dr. Rita CEO of the talk in I guess in first day primary session, we do have high adaptive decision support tool. The full form of high adaptive assessment based on description and responses and appraisal for typology, and it was developed by Human Dimensions Working Group. So in my research, what I have done is I have used high adaptive framework to conduct some kind of advanced analysis. So let me again bring up the idea of vulnerability viability that I talked in the beginning. Global partnership project called vulnerability viability. So the overall idea of this project is kind of we understand response to socio-ecological systems as kind of vulnerable because they are lacking kind of absence of well-being and loss of resilience and all global changes, but also they are kind of strengths within themselves which are made to kind of strong, and they are kind of dealing with global changes, right? So we do understand, we do take responsibility system on viable when they do have kind of resilience and adaptive capacity, well-being and sustainable livelihoods, and so on. Next slide, please. So in my research, what I did was I kind of tried to develop methodologies to assess the transition of responsible fisheries from vulnerability to viability. So in that case, while reviewing, I found that there are no specific methodologies that consider the vulnerability factors and viability factors together. So I did take adapt as a concept because it considers the vulnerability factors as well as the viability factors. So there were two main domains of the analysis in my research, mainly the qualitative analysis and the quantitative analysis. I won't go into qualitative analysis today, but I'm going to the quantitative methodology development. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the overall conceptualization, as I said earlier, is kind of transform responsible fisheries from vulnerability to viability. So this is just an example of vulnerability situation where responsible fisheries are treated dealing with empty nets, so they don't have any fish to catch. Right? So on the right hand side, you can see it is a kind of viable situation where they can catch a lot of fish. If they can catch a lot of fish, then they are kind of viable because they are kind of social capital and kind of also the material capital, right? So in my research, what I did is I did 29 case studies, that 29 socio-ecological systems from 19 different countries. So I didn't collect those case studies, but I did get those case studies from the members of SDWG and also the DATI members. So there is kind of I had a case study and we took that case study and then coded that case study again to a kind of semi-quantitative form. And in that semi-quantitative form, we do have 8 questions related to vulnerability, 11 questions related to the governance, 6 question response, 7 questions appraisal and ID development of 32 policies. So let me just go through the methodology that I followed in my research. So as I said earlier, we have the IATF case study, and then the rich qualitative information that was in the IATF case study was transformed into semi-quantitative information. Again, that process I didn't actually do. That was done by the members of SDWG, that member group, and then I just got the final data from them. So what I did was kind of I performed the multifactorial analysis and kind of clustering analysis in R and analyze those clusters. Now I don't want to go into detail like what are multifactorial analysis or clustering analysis because they're kind of statistical analysis tools that we use. But just to let you know, what MFA is a multivariate data analysis for visualizing complex data, and it allows us to kind of evaluate group of variables together. And also the clustering is kind of statistical analysis where you can group different kinds of questions. Okay, so this is the final result that I do have from MFA and also the clustering analysis. So you can see I did have 29 case studies as I said in the beginning. Now these 29 case studies, they group into 5 different clusters, right? So we do have different clusters that are formed based with similarities in the kind of characteristics within those clusters. You can see in the right hand side, we see KAR, PAN. Those are all the codes that are assigned to each of the case study. And now they are grouped together because they do have kind of similar characteristics related to vulnerability. They do have similar characteristics related to governance and response and then appraisal and all those. So now we are going to learn what can we learn from this grouping. So let me just go through the findings of my research. So the first thing, if we see the main issue, that is the overfishing species, ocean acidic fish and so on, faced by small scale fishes, more than half of the small scale fishes system was related to the social system at the local level. Again, if we see the second point, it says the main issue was related to the natural system at the local level. So these two findings combined, we can see that though the effects of global changes are much apparent on the natural systems, the consequences were heavy on the social systems. So that goes again back to the thing I brought up in the beginning, responsible fishes being the coupled human environmental systems and socio-ecological systems where they are complex drives, right? So the next point is global drivers. The global changes are kind of global drivers, but they are causing local changes. Those are related to sustainability of responsible fisheries. And then they have kind of direct linkages with the local changes that affect the small scale fishes directly. Next slide, please. So if we see the third point, the most common type of common similarity between the case studies was that the mode of governance in most of the case studies was hierarchical governance. So having hierarchical governance, I don't think it is itself causing vulnerable or with hierarchical governance, we can't transform into a viral situation, but hierarchical governance mostly tends towards tight and right conditions. If we have everything favorable in the environmental conditions, even with hierarchical governance, it might transform into viability, but that's not true. If we see the next point, the key regulation instruments and measures include the management of the things and mostly input measures. So I just think like having input measures is kind of a progressive approach that we are taking to transfer responsible fisheries from vulnerability to viability as compared to the output measures that we have. Next slide, please. Also, again, next similarity between the case studies was that the social power was highly concentrated in more than half of the responsible fisheries systems, and there had been no formal evaluation of the response in almost 48% of the case studies, and there were some livelihood opportunities in almost 48% of the small scale fisheries or the government systems. So let me just begin with the first thing, the social power was highly concentrated in more than half of the small scale fisheries ecosystems. So if the social power is concentrated, then I do think it leads to kind of challenges in the collective decision making, and then it can impact the governance thing like the co-governance or even multi-level type of governance like it's in that case. And if we see the second point, there has been no formal evaluation of the response in 40% of the cases. So I again want to highlight the importance I adapt in this case among the many types of that are available. I adapt one of the most powerful decision support tools that allows us to kind of evaluate the effectiveness of the responses. I remember in the plenary, somebody today in the morning said that evaluation of the responses are very necessary, or they are kind of very important in terms of dealing with the global changes in coastal fisheries, right? So again, there were some kind of livelihood opportunities and success in livelihood diversity doesn't mean coastal fisheries are transitioning from vulnerability to viability, because even though like they get alternative type of livelihood occupation, it doesn't mean it might mean that they can get more income and they do a kind of more wealth, but again that doesn't mean that they are kind of viable, because they are disconnected from resources. Okay, so as I said last time, the one of the most powerful like kind of thing that we can do using the adapt as this is appraisal of the response, where we can see that if those responses were effective or ineffective. So if we look at each of the clusters, then we can kind of look at if the responses followed in those case studies either for long term or either for short term were successful or unsuccessful. Just to give you a glance, in cluster one, most of the cases, responses have to overcome the effect of global changes. In cluster two, almost all of the cases to help them to form a kind of evaluation. And cluster three, there was no kind of formal evaluation of response. And cluster four, partial evaluation was done, and it was kind of similar case to the cluster five. So if we just look at this conclusion, then it might look like almost all of these small scale fisheries are kind of dealing with a failure situation where the responses are not being that much effective to deal with global changes. We might see that type of situation, but that's not true, because as the IADAP framework is just in the development phase, many of the cases that were failed by the practitioners and other kind of people, like they didn't fill all the information regarding the response, because this is just in development phase, and even the much of training is needed to kind of fill this adapt template. We didn't have all information, so due to that, it might look like all of the responses are failed, but it's too early to make that conclusion.
So we're just
So just linking to today's talk, why getting governance right is important, because most of the similarities between the case studies that I talked earlier, or most identity 7 similarities between the case studies, most of them were related to the governance, right? So getting governance right itself solves many concerns related to vulnerabilities and progress toward viability. Of course, this is not a 100% solution, but it might be kind of helpful, I guess, to reduce the vulnerabilities. So this is the conclusion. There was huge kind of variability in the data set that we got, but we just we didn't use all kinds of variability in the data set, and there is again a lot of kind of mathematics involved in it, which I don't want to escape it now at the time. So what I suggest is the future research will include more case studies, in the additional case studies. The pattern will kind of stabilize, and we can see the actual kind of pattern that is ongoing in socio-ecological changes. So again, I didn't present you the all results that I had done, and I presented in the past my results. So this analysis is still being explored proof of concept. So in the future, what we can do is like we can take more case studies and try to match both success and failures of socio-ecological systems, and then try to understand the effectiveness of the responses. So again, in future, we might need to conduct like some more type of analysis by taking adapt concepts. So next slide, please. So I also did the qualitative methods and kind of understand to kind of develop the clusters, also using the also using the did also develop clusters with the qualitative method, but I won't discuss that right now. This is my last slide.
After references? Oh.
So I just want to acknowledge this project is funded and supported by Lake Global Partnership under sub-partnership that led by Nair. And then thank you for listening to me. If you wish to be an IDROBO, I just see the that the idea. So you can just contact us. And then I just want to take this opportunity to thank the question and the guiding research. So thank you.
When you put up another method slide at the end there, I was like, oh, that's why I was like, I need to stand. Okay, do you mind standing over here just so that with question and answer? And Sonia, I'll ask you as well, maybe to give your talk from here. We got a chat message. Sorry about that. Great. Okay, so we have time for a couple questions. And anybody have questions? Yes, please. In back. What's your name? Anna. Thanks.
Thanks for I was thinking how would decision makers see your analysis to make decisions? Do you envision any type of translation of the results of your analysis to communicate with decision makers, or you can look at that and identify directions to go with your case studies? How do you see that?
For folks online, the question was around the way in which the results could be used by decision makers. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and thank you for your question. So in this case, what we have now, we do have clusters, right? Clusters of case studies. So for each of the clusters, I do have the characteristics of each of clusters. So what are the most kind of most repetitive kind of vulnerabilities that socio-ecological systems are facing? That is not just for a single socio-ecological system, but that's for a group of socio-ecological systems, right? And similarly, what kind of responses were being followed? I mean, that is not for a single socio-ecological systems, but for a group of socio-ecological systems. And that group of socio-ecological systems might be from different geographical areas, right? So I do have those kind of bullet points for each of the clusters, and then it might be useful for decision makers just to go through, because they aren't that much. They won't that come in that bunch of it won't be that detailed rich qualitative information, but it will be just kind of bullet information providing direct information. So we can just compare, not only just compare the case studies, but we can just compare the case studies within a cluster which lie in different geographical areas. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks. Is Sonia up next? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, while you get my slides up, I'll just start talking. And I'm going to use a few minutes of my 10 just to address a little bit of what happened this morning. We've had support for this afternoon, rather. I want to thank the Chippewas and Miwok for being our teachers this morning. I think they were brave in removing themselves when they felt uncomfortable and not heard. And I think that's important for us to sit with our discomfort if we feel uncomfortable about what happens. I want to acknowledge that we're on the land of that fantastic union, and this is new words for me, so I'm going to say it in a on this National Indigenous People Day and the summer solstice. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that and to remember where we are. And I think she kind of point nothing about them without them, so I'm not going to talk about people wanting to learn. But I do want to talk for a few minutes about my own path at Skipper Auto around acknowledging the role that we play in colonization and reconciliation as settlers on Indigenous land here in Canada and participating in small-scale fisheries. So I'll just talk for a few minutes about that. About 3 years ago, oh, I'm Sonia, by the way. I think you know that. About 3 years ago, we started a project that I called Active Listening. And I know that word's been brought up a little bit as well. And I think that it's something important to remember. I've written a couple of blogs on our work over the last 3 years on this topic. So I want to just share a couple of learnings from that, and then I'll talk about what I was going to talk about. So one thing that I've learned about reconciliation and decolonization work and what we need to do as those of us with settlers on this land is to start always by listening. And that goes a long way, rather than starting by being defensive or saying how hard we try to do it right in the first place. So maybe we can all think about that in our interactions with our Indigenous hosts and neighbors about starting by listening. I've learned how important it is to always start conferences by inviting the people of the land to welcome us. And that's something I think whenever we have an opportunity to host a conference, we should consider who are the people on the land and actually inviting them rather than just saying the words, which is the best I could do at this point. Something else I observed just about today was we did a few exercises where we said, hey, who's in the room? Who's a fisher here? Who's this, who's that? But we never said who's a first people of this land. And I think that's something that we should be considering, asking who is the first person of this land before we talk about other categories of people. I think we all could have done a better job of celebrating National Indigenous Peoples Day on the get-go this morning. There was, I learned subsequently, there was a sunrise celebration hosted by some local First Nations. I didn't learn about that until lunchtime today, and I would love to have known that was happening. And so, you know, I think a wonderful gesture would have been for us to have had a bus that was organized to take us an opportunity. Not everyone wanted to get up at sunrise, but I know I would have gone, and that would have been a nice way to kind of start our day. And then lastly, of course, we had a governance panel today with having an Indigenous voice on it, and so I think here we are also in a room. We are having some researchers, and thank you to the researchers who are for researching Indigenous governance, but I think we have to just remember who's not in the room and to be thinking about that. So those are just some thoughts I wanted to share with you before I go on to my talk. Okay, hi, I'm Sonia. I want to talk to you a little bit about community-supported fisheries. I called my talk Getting That's Right, and I'm aware of the irony of that, because there is no one right way to do community-supported fisheries, but I thought maybe it would be provocative enough to make you stay in the room while I, a non-academic, talked about something. You can skip to the next slide. This is my husband, Sean. He's out fishing right now on the west coast of Vancouver Island on the Shot-and-Hupatchisic territory. We're the founders of Skip Route Community Supported Fishery. You may not have heard, I'll try not to repeat myself too much. I'll talk a little bit about community supported fishery models, what we've learned over the last 20 years, governance of CSFs, and a few ideas along that topic. Next slide. Oh, wait, oh yeah, look at you. Yeah, and then you can click it again and look, see, teacher stuff, animations. So is there anybody here who is not familiar? Oh no, let's say it the other way around. Who's familiar with the concept of community supported fisheries? Okay, some people, good, okay. So just briefly and high level for those of you who might be a little bit unfamiliar with the concept, community supported fisheries got started in the late 2000s, and they were inspired by community supported agriculture programs, which are often thought of as like vegetable box programs. And you might subscribe and your farmer gives you a box of vegetables every week. You prepay for this. So CSFs really got started, they vary wildly. That's what I want to say next. There are enormous differences in community supported fisheries in terms of the scale of them, products offered, definition of local, how far they distribute, their operations and their governance. There are now about 200 community supported fisheries, more or less, in North America. They sort of come and they go, so I may not be right on top of today's. There's a smattering outside of North America as well. Next slide, please. So CSFs and other direct seafood networks often share broad objectives like marine conservation, protecting a fishing way of life, and food security. I mentioned earlier, we also have a key objective, which is reconciliation and decolonization work. Most CSFs, though, talk about this concept of the triple bottom line. They talk about having a social, environmental, and economic objectives. Next slide, please. But beyond those high-level objectives, really, CSFs and other direct seafood networks have, just this huge variety of forms, and they need to, because every coast and every fishing community has a different set of circumstances. And so, having said that, I think that there's a lot we can learn from one another about how CSFs have what has been tried, what has worked in different contexts. And so I'm not a researcher. You can skip to the next slide, but I do know some researchers. This was a paper written by Among others, Ali Witter, who some of you might know. Ali Witter actually worked at Skipperotto 7-8 years ago while she was doing her PhD. And this paper is called Towards the Economic Viability of Local Seafood Programs, Key Features for the Financial Performance of Community-Supported Fisheries. So this and other research have been done to try to understand what makes a community-supported fishery successful. What are some of the models that kind of work? And in this paper, you can click again, 3 of the key indicators that the authors uncovered. They talked about these 3 things as being kind of running through CSFs as successful CSF. So those that had an online presence, those that had choice for members, so that members didn't just get a mystery box of fish every week, but that they could pick and choose in some way. And those that had a fisher founder who was still involved in the organization. These seemed to be kind of key features that they shared. Having said that, this is data from 2014. And so when we talk about online presence, I think now in 2022, the way we think about online presence has changed a little bit. So there's lots of interesting stuff in the paper, but I think it'd be really interesting for somebody to revisit this. Nudge, nudge, if anybody wants to research CSFs, I think it'd be great. So I'll talk a little bit about what we chose, because that's what I can talk about. We chose to be a buy-down style community-supported fishery. And so that means that people invest a lump sum of money before the fishing season, and they can choose how much they want to put in. We have a share size calculator that helps them figure out how much fish they're going to eat in a year. So say it's like $500. They would put in $500 at the start of the fishing season. But that's a credit, and then they can shop in the online store, pick and choose what they want, and the dollar value comes off their credit. So that speaks to what they uncovered in the paper about the importance of choice. We found that's with our members as well. Nobody likes a mystery box of fish, right? So where people can have choice, that's great. The next thing is about frozen seafood. So in order to do buy down style where people can pick and choose, and in order to even out the variations, you've got salmon all comes in 2 months, but people would like to eat salmon through the year. You really need to be able to process and freeze your seafood. And that, I think, is a common thing that CSFs are moving toward now. We chose an annual membership program. I think that's a really key. I think sometimes CSFs are like a house of cards. There are all these pieces, and if you take one out, the whole thing falls apart, right? And so the fact that you have an annual membership is important. If you try to sell one-off pieces of fish, you don't have people's attention for a whole year. You can't educate them, and that's what you need to do. They need to understand complex small-scale fisheries. So when you've got them on board for a whole year, you can really kind of teach them. If it's a one-off piece of fish, like there's a farmer's market, you have really limited opportunity to involve people. So the annual membership is important for us. And then we chose to do no restaurants or retail. Well, I'll rephrase that. We've a couple of very small restaurants who do buy a little bit of fish from us, but we've chosen not to focus our attention there. And that's because the purpose of our community-supported fishery is to build a just and equitable and resilient seafood system. And that we believe that one of the best ways to do that is to flow more dollars from the price of the fish into the hands of the harvesters. That's such a key piece of it. And as soon as you add an extra set of hands, like a wholesaler, a distributor, or a restaurant, or a retailer, there's less money for the harvesters. And so for us, it adds complexity. It reduces the price we can pay to harvesters. And so we have chosen to say no to that. Next slide. One more decision that we made was to be a for-profit business. And this is something that sometimes surprises people. And you'll hear people often assume that community-supported fisheries are co-ops. And we had a really interesting conversation on the governance session earlier today about cooperatives and the principles of cooperatives. And as I was reading through all those principles of cooperatives, I thought, wow, yeah, I know those, and those are all the principles of our business. And so I think you don't have to be a co-op to employ cooperative principles. But there are some drawbacks to the co-op model in fishing. We addressed those a little bit this morning in the panel. We were talking about them. But for us, when we first started to do CSF, I also thought a co-op model would be the right way to go. And when I talked to harvesters, that's not what they wanted. They wanted to fish, and they wanted a fair, just buyer, a fair price for their fish. They didn't want to make websites. They want to have to go to board meetings. They didn't want to have to sit at the dock or sit at a farmer's market and sell their fish. Right? They wanted someone to honor them and tell their stories, but they didn't want to add all this work. And so we took their lead. Oh, and the other thing was they said, we want to be, you can click all those ones up there because I'm talking in random order. They said they wanted to be able to collect EI. And that there were problems with them being members of co-ops or owners of the business for them not to be able to collect EI. I learned that business isn't inherently evil, despite what I may have grown up thinking, actually. And that I think the tools of business are very powerful. The problem is that they're often used purely for profit and for profit for distant shareholders. But if we use those same very powerful tools, but we just turn the fire hose on the objective of equity and social justice, environmental justice, protecting a fishing way of life, actually we can be very efficient and very powerful. And so that's kind of, yeah, where we got to with that. Last couple of slides. I don't have a timer in front of me, but I'm trying to talk fast. There are lots of people doing direct seafood sales today. They're not all what I would call community-supported fisheries. Who am I to define what a community-supported fishery is? But I'll tell you what I think anyway. In my mind, the difference between an online fish delivery company and a community-supported fishery are a few things. In a community-supported fishery, members prepay, and that's important because it guarantees fishers a fair market for their catch, no matter what it is, because the members agree to eat with the ecosystem. So that if there's not sockeye salmon this year, but there's lots of coho salmon, they agree that they're going to take coho salmon. So this is not the case with an online fish delivery system, right? An online fish delivery system is just a retail store that buys from the same industrial food system that has all of these other social environmental problems. In my mind, a community-supported fishery is fisher direct. So it is traceable to the person who caught it and the boat that it was caught on. And that's generally not the case with most of the just sort of online fish delivery things that kind of came up during COVID. So right now there are 2 community-supported fisheries in Canada that I know of. There are probably lots of other versions of direct-to-consumer seafood networks, and I want to meet them all. Skipper Otto and Michelle Rose, CSF on the West Coast as well. We know Guy Johnson very well. Although we have a lot in common, we have a lot of differences. Guy has a one-boat operation where he has members who prepay. They get a box of frozen fish at the end of the year, whatever he puts together. And you know a little bit about our system. We have 40 fishing families in our collective now and 8,300 members across Canada who pre-purchase and have a choice. Next slide. Yeah, next clicks. There, you may know, if you're from the East Coast, you may know a bit about Off the Hook community-supported fishery. It existed based out of Halifax from 2010 to 2016. I'm in contact with the great folks at Ecology Action Centre who started that CSF. I've met with them a few times, especially over the last month. They're issuing a report. It should be coming out any day now. I actually hoped that they would have it, and I really hoped that they would come here and talk about it, but they weren't ready. So I just want to flag it for you. Watch for that report. I've had some amazing conversations with them about what they learned about the governance, particularly of their CSF, what worked and what didn't, and why ultimately they decided to close it down, but why I'm working on them to start it up again. So stay tuned for that. And of course, there's the Local Catch Network. Click to the next slide if you like. I think you've seen this before. This is the Local Catch Network based out of the US, but supporting community-supported fisheries and other direct seafood networks in the US and Canada as well. If you're wondering where you can get fish or direct seafood if you don't happen to catch it yourself, if you click again, the website there is finder.localcatch.org. And there's tons of community-supported fisheries, mostly in the US. And I'm on the executive at Local Catch, working hard to try to proliferate the CSF model here in Canada as well. If you're interested in that conversation in the next session, which is Inspiring New Pathways, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing next at Skipper Otto, because we're not just selling more fish, we're doing some cool things around software and the proliferation of the model. So encourage you to come to that if you want to talk about that. But like all of you seem to do, I've taken a page from your notebooks. Leave with questions. So here's some questions that I would love for somebody to try to answer. What are the objectives of CSFs broadly? I've told you what ours are. I would love for somebody to research. What are the objectives of CSFs? Do they vary? How do you measure if a CSF is successful? It's not just financial, but how do you measure that? And how are our CSFs measuring it for themselves? I'd love to know more. And I can tell you what I do, but I'd love to more at what others are doing. And then what are some of the common threads that run through quote unquote successful CSFs? What do they have in common? Because I think with that kind of information, we can support the proliferation of community supported fisheries. And as you know, I happen to believe that that is a really important way that we can support small scale fishing in Canada and around the world. That's all I got for you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, so we have time for probably one question. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, when I was young, we used to have the Harkins Fish Market in Bridgewater that had a truck that would go around the coast and sell fish directly to the consumer. And they went under, not because of not being a good management model, or it's consumer buying the change. People would go to the grocery store. National Sea Products was fish sticks in those days. Now it's everything in the grocery stores. And when Off the Hook came, we thought, oh, this is great. You know, we're going to get back to the good old days of the 60s. Talking to fishermen who are involved, one of the things that affected them quite a bit was the changing cost of fuel, the changing cost of fishing, license fee changes, that kind of thing. Eventually, they were bearing the cost to provide that service. With rising fuel costs right now, how do you think it's going to affect your business?
Yeah, and it's a very good question.
Sonia,
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. The question was actually a great preamble that I won't repeat the whole thing, but the question ultimately is how will rising fuel costs affect community supported fisheries, or us in particular? Yeah, and I mean, we are obviously all struggling. My husband just filled the boat at $2.16 a liter for marine diesel. It's unheard of. So the costs of the fish are going up. We work with each of our fishing families to determine, we think of each fishing family as entrepreneurs themselves, right? And so often they aren't the best ones at building financial models. So they all say, oh, it's okay, it's fine, I don't know. They just kind of roll costs together, but they end up with no money left for themselves. So one of the things that we do is business mentorship, where we say, okay, here, like, what are all your costs? Let's figure that out. Let's figure out what would be a living wage for you from this fish, and what will we have to sell that at? Also acknowledging that if we charge 5 times what people would pay for the fish somewhere else, they're not going to join, or they're not going to come back. They're not going to buy much of that fish. So we work together with fishing families to find that balance. We're always calling around and finding out what seafood is going for that day in different stores, so we can balance those interests and find that sweet spot. We could give you 25 cents more a pound, that's great, but we might sell, 100 pounds less of it. Like, where's the sweet spot? So that's the work that we're actively doing every day with our fishing families.
Excellent. Thank you very much. For sticking with us, we have one last talk. Solmundur, you're up. I'm going to stop sharing here. And we're down to the last kind of 15 minutes, so we're good there. I see you. Great. Thank you so much. Feel free to share your screen.
Okay. Hi. Thank you all for your interesting presentations. I'm talking from Winnipeg. I actually do say that I had to change my presentation a little bit because my colleague and who is a First Nation fisher could not make it. He is stuck basically like cleaning and rebuilding roads in his community after floods this spring. So my presentation will be more just my own observation of my research on Lake Winnipeg. So I'm not talking on behalf of anyone. It's only like just my observation as an anthropologist working on Lake Winnipeg. So one thing that I've been thinking about a lot since I started working on Lake Winnipeg is this idea of like try to like find the right institutional arrangement, like how can we get governance right? And sometimes I think that question is really difficult just because every society is different, every culture is different, and more important, like values change across time and space. So we are in constant movement, and we have to kind of take that into consideration, and we have to allow especially fishers to become reflective political actors, which they are, but they're often dismissed from both politicians and bureaucrats. So I want to take one example, which is Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation, which kind of epitomize this, like how hard it is to find the right balance in institutions. And it kind of like highlights how imbalanced power structure and politics can influence this whole process. And we sometimes fall into that pitfall of there's only like certain acceptable solutions, which completely stifles people's freedom to actually reimagine their own social organization or social systems, which is really sad, like especially when we look at throughout the history of humankind. But anyway, so I spent 4 years on Lake Winnipeg to do my ethnographic research. So it's a relatively small fishing. It only produced like 6.5 million kilograms annually. But what's most important is that it is predominantly First Nations and Métis fishery. And I will like come back to it a little bit later because of it's so dominated by First Nation Métis, their governments, both federal and provincial, tend to push the fishers aside. And again, like Lake Winnipeg fishery have those 3 seasons, like it's spring, fall, and winter, when they like fish through the ice. And in theory, like the fishery is first and foremost just one fisher and one port. And they have like ITQ system, which I just don't have time to talk about here. But I actually talked about it like probably 6-7 years ago in this exactly same conference in Merida, because it was kind of weird how the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation and the accord system kind of like worked. But it's like this time I'm only gonna talk about Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation because I'm still kind of like developing my arguments about like cooperation and how people can like look at economies and how the future economies should look like. So this quick overview from the history of the fishery. So from like 1885 to like 1960s, like the fisheries were like dominated by American buyers, and all the surplus values of the fishery went straight out of the province, and it was basically like first come first serve policy. Is that like the fishers who were the quickest to get the fish and sell the fish, they always got the best price. And then the people who came later, they got less. So the fishers in Manitoba and in other provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Northwest Territories, they actually like called for the federal government to come in and help. And they actually were basically asking to be bailed out because that system wasn't helping anyone. Not even some of the American buyers who didn't even get as much profit as they probably could have. So when the officials called for those actions, the federal government and the provincial governments decided to create this crown corporation, Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation. And that crown corporation was supposed to work almost like a co-op. So they were supposed to buy every fish from fishers who were legally caught. And in the end of the financial year, if there were profits to be made, it would be distributed to the members. So the Crown Corporation got basically monopoly here in Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northern Ontario, and Northwest Territories. So that was kind of like really interesting period because you saw politicians, especially here in Manitoba, talking about how Americans were making basically like profits illegally just because they saw they were making profits out of their fishers' work, that they were actually exploiting the fishers. And those same politicians especially in Manitoba, which I know the best, like they actually like admitted that freedom, for example, that like the competition should not be this like central principle of freedom and not even like in the market. So Manitoba actually created like marketing boards for beef and other for farmers too, just to make sure that every surplus values would go straight back to the producer, and which is really interesting. And then they like had this like big processing plant in Winnipeg, which kind of like wasn't supposed to be originally, but I'll come to that in a minute. But like the people don't talk about the success of this Crown Corporation because people always fixated on what it did wrong. But one of the main success is not just that the fishers certainly had the guaranteed buyer for the fish, and the fishers here in Manitoba could sell retailers, hotels, and everyone else under that umbrella. But what is interesting about that, about the federal corporation, about marketing corporation here, was that it's only like allowed fishers certain degree of freedom, in the sense that like certainly the fishers do not have to compete with each other, and it also shielded them from the competition from the outside world. So they did not have to compete against big corporations in the US or Europe. And kind of secured this fundamental freedom of autonomy, in the sense that like they didn't have to listen to anyone else than themselves, which is remarkable. And that's what many of the fishers on Lake Winnipeg liked about that setup, is that I said like it granted them that autonomy to actually be fishers, and they could spend the time what they wanted, and they didn't have to listen to anyone. And the fishers actually talked about it with me a lot, that they actually like didn't see competition as a freedom. Necessarily, they talk much more about, as probably all of you have talked about, like sustaining a community, and they actually saw the market as some sort of mutual aid, make sure that everyone has enough just to survive and actually enjoy life.
So Solmundur,
Yeah.
just we're running at almost 10 minutes now. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
just to give you a
Okay.
time. Thanks.
I'm almost done.
Thanks.
So they like see this importance of like caring for their like families to be able to play, and certainly, like I said, like the neoliberalism in the end kind of like pushed freshwater like aside and said that, oh, like competition should be the center of freedom. So the politicians started to celebrated competition and saw the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation monopoly as something morally wrong. And the some fishers did the same. And it's mostly just because of the economics, because freshwater like could not keep up with high prices. So some of the fishers, the big ones, want to move on, while the other ones like are still strong in that mutual aid as the main principle of economies. And the failure of the freshwater was also to push the fishers back, and they certainly lost their voice in how the corporation should be run. Suddenly it was just politicians and bureaucrats. So in the end, then this is a question is all about this future of how future economies should look like. And now the officials here and in other provinces are trying to establish this interprovincial co-op because many of them don't see competition as a center of the market. And again, like it is this like those things changes, like politics changes, and the values that politicians hold changes across space and time. And that happened to freshwater is that it kind of got forgotten in Ottawa, and they just wanted like slowly to turn it into a private enterprise again. So in the future we always should like talk about like which values should be the central principle for the future economy. So I guess I have to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just hitting break time. I do want to ask if there's any question before we all make a lot of noise, because that's going to be very difficult. So just sit in your seat for 5 more seconds if you don't mind, just so I can get a sense of any hands, if there's any questions. And so just a round of applause for all of our speakers, and then give me 1 minute. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Online participants for being there. I just wanted to remind everybody that it's session 4.1 that Chippewas and Nawash we're running that will not be on. So just to let you know, there's a 15-minute break, and then there's 3 parallel sessions that start in 15 minutes. That's pretty short turnover, which is why I think I don't want to go too much over. Thanks to everyone for your attention.